Welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast, everyone. My name's Elijah. Got a bit of an interesting episode for you guys today. I think that I think that I, I personally am running a tiny bit dry on Orioles content. There hasn't been anything all too exciting. Um, I have the standings up in front of me. I was just perusing, and we're 15 and 24. We have the worst run differential in the American League, the third worst in all of baseball, and I don't know. You could say we took two of three from the team that has the second worst in the American League. So are we really better than the Angels? Certainly talent-wise we are, but the record, the run differential, all of that disagrees. Um, but like this past weekend, the Orioles go into Anaheim. They take two of three. I think the most positive things you can look at are Tomoyuki Sugano was really phenomenal again. Zach Eflin is healthy and pitched fine, as well as could be expected for his first game back. Sugano, you know, seven and a third, just consistently going out there, eating up innings for us, limiting damage. The guy has been everything you could possibly hope for. Zach Eflin coming back is very simply like, I mean, he was the preeminent hole missing, from what we expected to have through the month of April. He was the biggest hit. And so it cannot be overstated how important it is that he's back. And then the other thing, I mean, very, very simply, Gunnar Henderson has started hitting the ball. I was just checking it out. It looks like coming out of the Twins series, his OPS was 698, and it is currently sitting at 780. He raised his OPS 82 points in the span of 3 games. Um, while that is hilarious, it is a good reminder also that we are still just dealing with a relatively small sample. This has been 1 month and a little under 2 weeks of the season. So good to see Gunnar getting hot. Tyler O'Neill's back in the lineup. Ramon Laureano continues to do pretty well. Jackson Holliday's been hitting the ball very well. There are, some signs of life, I guess I'll say. The Orioles have the Minnesota Twins coming to town. I'm recording this on Tuesday night. It is a slightly delayed episode for this Angels series, but they were supposed to start playing tonight. Cade Povich was supposed to start the game. It was rained out. We now have a doubleheader tomorrow. They're talking about Dean Kramer starting the first game and TBA for the second game, which I think is very interesting. You would assume that they would say Cade Povich would just start the next night, but I think there's a chance we maybe get a little bit of a surprise tomorrow. Some people have mentioned Chase McDermott's name. I think that'd be very fun. I would, be surprised by it. He had missed some time coming back from a knee injury, if I remember right. Or Trevor Rogers was the knee injury. I think he had a lat issue. Um, I digress. So I think we have a chance to see something kind of fun tomorrow night. That said, that is not really the topic of this podcast. What we're going to talk about tonight is a development across Major League Baseball. Every once in a while, we like to do these episodes, get in tune with the larger picture to an extent. We did a similar thing, with the Oakland A's moving and not becoming the Oakland A's. We have gone ahead and talked about collective bargaining agreements. Every once in a while, we step back a little bit. And really, the topic of the evening is Rob Manfred has made a decision to remove, uh, posthumously remove anybody who was on the permanently ineligible list. So in effect, you know, the most famous case is Pete Rose, but this also includes Shoeless Joe Jackson. These are guys who were ineligible, quote unquote, permanently. It is called the permanently ineligible list. I think that's kind of silly now because if you remove them from the list, then it's not permanent in any way, shape, or form. It is a temporarily ineligible list. Um, but you know, Rob Manfred has made this decision. I think it's pretty inarguable that he has done so in the face of pressure from Donald Trump. Trump has continued to speak out on Pete Rose's behalf. And I just wanted to dig into this a little bit today, and show kind of what's unbelievable about it. I think that everybody calls Pete Rose, quote unquote, the hit king, and there's this image of him as somebody who performed for many many years. I'll note the Philadelphia Phillies made a statement today and said the Phillies support today's decision by Commissioner yeah, I'm going to take that back. The Phillies support today's decision by Commissioner Manfred and Major League Baseball to remove Pete Rose from the permanently ineligible list. As one of the greatest players in the history of the game, Pete made significant on-field contributions to the Phillies over his 5 seasons, 79 to 83, with the club highlighted by our first World Series title in 1980. And what is hilarious about this is if you go ahead and you pull up Pete Rose's stats for 1979 to 1983 with the Philadelphia Phillies, Pete Rose was worth 1.2 WAR in a total of 5 seasons. In the 1980 season where the Phillies did win that World Series title, he was worth negative zero point 0.4 WAR. In this time, the quote unquote hit king managed an OPS of just, or I'm sorry, OPS plus of just 101. He hit 291, 365, 361, slugging lower than his OBP. And yeah, all around was not a good baseball player for the Philadelphia Phillies, particularly not in the season that they called out. Um, there's this illustrious view of who this guy was. Uh, I think that if anyone was talented enough to go ahead and play, let's see, 22, or I guess it was 1963 to 1986, so 24 seasons in MLB, you have the ability to collect more hits when you play for that long. And that just is the reality of the situation. In his last, 6, 7 years in the league, he was frankly not all that good. Um, let's see, in 1980, he was a below average offensive player. In 1982, below average. 1983, below average. 1984, below average. 1985, below average. And 1986, below average. So he finished, his career on a cool 7 year run of being a below average, or I'm sorry, 6 out of 7 years, of being a below average offensive player. And, that's who we're talking about as the hit king, and who he was insufferable and would constantly remind you that he was the hit king. He would go out of his way to tarnish, anything that Ichiro Suzuki did. He would go out of his, like, I remember he called the Nippon Professional Baseball League and Ichiro's stats over there. He said, "What are we going to start counting high school stats now?" When people noted that Ichiro had more professional hits. So this was a wholly unsavory guy. I want to really drive that home with a couple notes. I have in front of me, for those watching on YouTube, an article from The Athletic written by Ken Rosenthal that is really, really phenomenal. Recommend that anybody goes ahead and does this. Um, Give me 1 minute to scroll. Yeah, so on top of just, well, I guess I can step back and say, right, Pete Rose was banned from baseball because he bet on baseball. This is one of the inarguable, truths of baseball, is that you cannot bet on baseball if you are a participant of baseball. That is a conflict of interest. This is a just commonplace rule. Everyone knows it. Even Ipe Mizuhara, Shohei's translator, who stole something on the order of like tens of millions of dollars from Shohei Ohtani. Even he knew I cannot bet on baseball, and he didn't do it. Um, but frankly, like Pete Rose has a horrible conflict of interest. If he were to bet on his own team, which he did do, he says it was only betting on them to win, but he did bet on his own team, which creates this horrible conflict of interest. He could throw the game as the other guy on the list, Shoeless Joe Jackson, did the 1919, if I'm remembering okay, 1919, yeah, Chicago White Sox, known as the Black Sox, because they threw the World Series and made a lot of money, I'm sure. But, this is the reason that these guys are on this list, that they broke this one rule that everybody knows is a rule. It has been a rule since 1919, and we keep having to have this discussion. And it, it's it's so frustrating because this was the rule. Everyone knew the rule. They broke the rule, and they were, you know, being punished in accordance with breaking the rule. That is what has happened here. Is he was punished because he broke the rule, and he was punished accordingly because he broke the rule. It's so simple. And I know I'm saying, these same couple words over and over again, but I'm trying to hammer home that this is just a fundamentally simple concept. That there was a rule, he broke the rule, and he was punished because he broke the rule. This was the punishment for breaking the rule, going on the permanently ineligible list. You are never allowed to be a participant in baseball ever again. And I believe it was in 1982, shortly after, in 1991, I'm sorry, 1991, 1.5 years after Pete Rose agreed to his ban, um, the Baseball Writers Association of America, or I'm sorry, uh, okay, BBWA never voted on Pete Rose. I'm sorry. So the Hall of Fame's board agreed in 1991 that no players on the ineligible list could be considered for election to the Hall of Fame. And, you know, Pete Rose is like I don't I'm not even sorry. You broke the rule that this is the punishment. You do not get to be, celebrated as one of the greats of the game because you broke this rule, because you did this awful thing. It's very simple. Um, the other couple things I want to say here, Pete Rose was not just like bad in the on-field sense. We have all of these qualms about what people do off the field versus on the field. Some guys make it back into baseball, others don't. There are like anti-social justice warriors still fighting for Trevor Bauer to come back in the league. And there's all of this stuff about what people do on versus off the field, and they argue this. And Pete Rose was awful on the field because or I guess, because he bet on baseball. That is a like within the scope of baseball crime. But there is also the fact that while he like in the 1970s, while he was with the Cincinnati Reds, he had an alleged sexual relationship with a girl under 16 years old. And to be very clear, the alleged portion of this is not that he had sex with this girl, not that he, had a relationship with her. He just claims that she was 16, so it was okay. The age of consent in, I guess he was in Cincinnati, um, was 16 years old. And so his defense is that, not that it didn't happen. It's that, yeah, I mean, I was this full grown man playing in professional baseball and I don't know, 20s and 30s. Let me see. In the 70s, in 1970, he was 29. Yeah. So, I mean, this is a 30-year-old man hooking up with somebody half his age. And so, and once again, his defense was never that I didn't do that. His defense was she was 16 years old, so it wasn't a crime. And it just like shows the distorted like nature of how he never viewed anything that he actually did as wrong, really. Um, and yeah, I mean, a 5 months prison sentence for tax evasion in 1990. He's just this awful human being. And to I guess one other thing is that like there are stories of during Cooperstown, or I'm sorry, during Hall of Fame induction weekend, he would go and he would like set up a table on Main Street in Cooperstown, and he would sell his own autographs to, just be petty, be spiteful. And I think through all of this, like American men have this horribly, horribly toxic quality that they love toxic men. They love just the worst human beings. And that's what Pete Rose was. So he became this icon and this martyr for this like this horrible, horrible segment of our populace that thinks that for whatever reason he deserves better. And this is a guy who preyed on a younger woman who evaded his taxes, who bet on baseball, who like just fundamentally an awful human being. And like I mean, you look at these stats, and sure, he had great seasons. I'm not trying to deny or say that this guy wasn't like a talented player, but his name carried him through, the last like 7 years of his career. And in that time span, he added, I'm trying to do some quick math, stand by. All right, it's not going to happen. He added over 500 hits, over 600 hits, I should say. So this vaunted hit total that he claims, oh man, baseball reference is good. I missed that I could do this. Okay, 699 hits after the time that he was 40 years old. And, this vaunted hit total that he clung to so much, and like the moniker the Hit King came from, if he's not just writing his name for the last, like, yeah, 1981 to 1986 for the last 6 years in the league or whatever. He's just it's very simple. He's not the Hit King anymore. This was a very talented player who, if he had not done anything off the field, would likely deserve it. He likely would be in the Hall of Fame, and he would earn that. But the very simple fact of the matter is that, this is a place where MLB stance has always been very, very clear. And in the most recent wave of these culture wars, MLB became the target of Donald Trump, and he started focusing on them. And Rob Manfred is being a coward, and he is scared of, I'm sure MLB losing their antitrust exemption, which, yes, like MLB is a monopoly. There are no major baseball leagues in America besides MLB. So MLB is protected, and is basically given, the rights to dominate this industry because Congress has decreed it as such. Uh, and that's something that Donald Trump could threaten him with, could threaten Rob Manfred with. I think this is very simply just cowardice. This is not wanting to become the target of Donald Trump's ire. And this is him going ahead and saying, well, I cleared the pathway. He is off the ineligible list. So there are no rules preventing him from ultimately becoming a member of the Hall of Fame. Now, I don't know what Rob Manfred hopes happens from this point forward. I won't try to speak to that, but what I can say with confidence is that he's really glad it's out of his hands, and he has passed the buck on to the voting committees, that are going to have to evaluate this case. Uh, this was also in the Rosenthal article. I believe he is going to come up. There we go. Pete Rose and Shoeless Joe Jackson will be eligible for induction in the winter of 2027 as part of the class of 2028. Um, yeah, so like this will then need to be reviewed by somebody else. Um, like on this era's committee ballot, it's a committee of 16 people. You have to receive 75% of the vote, and there's a chance Pete Rose gets into the Hall of Fame, despite, like breaking the one rule in baseball that you can't break. It's so simple. Um, and I brought up this article not just for my own quick reference, but I wanted to point out, the like there's so many examples of Rob Manfred flip-flopping on what he says publicly, and just kind of kowtowing to, I don't know, powerful people, and, like just saying whatever is right for his owners and the people that he's protecting, which that is his job. But it just shows a fundamental lack of interest in protecting the integrity of the game. He is focused on protecting these owners' bank accounts. He is focused on protecting the business. Um, and that's his job. And sure, I understand that, but we just need to never get it construed here. So in 2022, after receiving a letter from Pete Rose asking for forgiveness, Manfred told the Baseball Writers Association of America, quote, I believe that when you bet on baseball, from Major League Baseball's perspective, you belong on the permanently ineligible list. So, pretty much in no uncertain terms, he went ahead and said, yes, he belongs on the permanently ineligible list. He should not, in any way, shape, or form, like be able to return to baseball. He obviously was aware at the time that people on the permanently ineligible list could not get into the Hall of Fame. That is all context behind this statement. Rob Manfred was not aware, was not aware. Rob Manfred was aware of these things when he said, yes, he belongs on that list. Now, on Tuesday, Rob Manfred says to Pete Rose's lawyer, or I guess former lawyer before Rose had passed away, he says, in my view, a determination must be made regarding how the phrase, quote, permanently ineligible should be interpreted regarding Rule 21, which addresses betting on baseball by people in the sport. Obviously, this is quoting Manfred again, obviously, a person no longer with us cannot represent a threat to the integrity of the game. And this is a hilarious line. It's like he's dead. So anything that he did or anything that he did cannot really be a threat to us anymore. And maybe yes, the bets that Pete Rose placed when he was playing for the Cincinnati Reds or playing for the Phillies, whoever it was, those bets certainly cannot threaten the game in the most like concrete sense. The Cincinnati Reds, like Ellie De La Cruz is not influenced and his performance is not influenced by what Pete Rose is doing. That said, the integrity of the game from the standpoint of like if you back up from like the physical games being played on the field, the integrity of the game, I think, means something much, much larger. And it is integrity in what sorts of humans you allow to participate in this thing, what sorts of humans you revere, what sorts of humans you honor. And right now, Rob Manfred himself is a threat to the integrity of the game. And Pete Rose, despite the fact that he is dead, is a threat to the integrity of the game. And I say despite the fact that he's dead, what's ironic about it is the fact that he died and Manfred is using his death as, the hook to get him off of this permanently ineligible list. The fact that he died is actually what once again makes him a threat to this game. He was not a threat to the game while he was alive and he was just complaining in his little corner. He was not a threat to the game then. Now, he is a threat to the integrity of the game because now like the errors committee has to go and reconcile with, okay, how do we handle this guy? And they can make the wrong answer. And even if they don't make the wrong answer, this invites so much conversation. And this is like I here's here's my analogy. I remember a number of years ago, I think it was John Oliver was talking about climate change, one of his little segments on last week tonight. And he said 98 in 100 climate scientists believe that global warming is a thing. The reason that it does not seem like an unequivocal fact is because anytime you hear it talked about on TV, there is one person for global warming and there is one person against. And if you wanted to really have this debate, you would need a, team that is 49 times the size of the anti-climate change team and the anti-global warming team, and you would need them to be better funded, better researched, all this stuff. And that would be the debate. You would have those, 98 people against these two people over here. And basically what that boils down to is by inviting the conversation, by putting the conversation forth, you lend credence to both sides, right? When this was not a conversation, Pete Rose meant nothing. When this was not a conversation, the stance on betting in baseball was very, very clear. But now that this is once again like at the highest levels of baseball, and once again, like just because of external pressure, because this is a conversation again because I am here making a podcast about it. You guys are talking about it with your friends. There are athletic articles being written about it by Ken Rosenthal. Because this is happening again, now all those people who love Pete Rose and want him to be in the Hall of Fame, their voices mean something again. They didn't mean anything before. And that is a threat to the integrity of the game. That is a threat to like the integrity of baseball from a moral standpoint. In the simplest way, that is what the threat is. And this is just such a like tone deaf statement from Rob Manfred. He is obviously attempting to justify these actions in a way that is not saying, I put my tail between my legs and I don't want Donald Trump to come after baseball's money. That's what this statement means. That's what this statement means. And yeah, man, it's so frustrating. Like we will never be tired. Somehow, we will never be tired of this conversation that just says like these horrible, horrible people deserve more. Horrible people do not deserve more. I don't know why we have to relitigate this in so many different ways, but that is like the fundamental argument that has supported Pete Rose for ever since he retired or ever since 1991 when the Hall of Fame's board decided he was ineligible to be in the Hall of Fame. That is the reality of it is people are saying that Pete Rose deserves more when he does not deserve anything. He probably already had too much given to him, too much attention. Um, yeah. So anyway, I think my rant is over. That is I don't know. That's the little spiel about Pete Rose. And I guess in a larger sense, what this permanently ineligible list and kind of changing that actually means in the fundamental sense. Um, I like Rosenthal's article, I will say, if you get the chance to read it, does go on and talk about other things. I think there are legitimate questions now about steroid users. We have, I say we, the Hall of Fame electorate, as in the Baseball Writers Association of America, has kind of collectively decided that people who did steroids should not really get into the Hall of Fame. Clearly, Barry Bonds would be there if not. Barry Bonds did not, sexually assault a young woman, did not prey on a young woman for, sexual relations. So, like, sure, he wasn't great with the media, but Barry Bonds was legitimately one of the best players of all time. That is widely recognized by literally everyone. Um, and he is now unofficially banned from Cooperstown while we have to go like again and relitigate Pete Rose. And again, this comes up at the end of 2027. We will see what the Errors Committee does. But man, it is so sad. And once again, this will be the last thing I say about it. But it is so sad to, you know, I guess this whole discussion of the integrity of the integrity of the game, this discussion of like how morality plays a role in baseball. This external force in Donald Trump just started like tweeting about it and complained, and then he went and met with Rob Manfred, and now here we are. Like integrity of the game could mean like the way that baseball controls its own internal workings, and that has clearly also been shattered, right? That this is external pressure being put upon MLB, upon its commissioner in particular, and as a result, the commissioner has once again put his tail between his legs. He has kowtowed, and yeah, I mean he is forcing all of this on us now. Um, this continued discussion about a truly despicable human being who was, self-aggrandizing and like his crusade was the only thing that mattered to him. Um, yeah, I mean just truly unbelievable that this is where we are. That this is like th this is the culture war that a portion of the country has decided on, that they want um, all terrible old men to not be terrible anymore. They want to glorify them. Anyway, that's all I got. Yeah, let's hope that the Errors Committee makes the correct decision and once again just boots this guy from the Hall of Fame ballot in 2027, and we never have to do this again. We like, I'm sure that's not the case. We'll keep relitigating it um, in perpetuity, I think, but we can all hope. In the meantime, yeah, the Twins are coming to Baltimore for a couple games here. We will hopefully try to redeem ourselves a little bit after that super, super embarrassing sweep. The Twins have kind of gone on a tear since we last saw them. I think they're on an 8-0 run right now. So it's actually not very fun to be seeing them. I'm kind of horrified by it, but we do have the Nationals at home following that for a 3-game set. The Nats are, well, I don't know. I want to say the Nats are an easier opponent, but somebody tweeted out shortly before the first Twins series last week. They said, Twins fans, oh my God, we get to go play the Orioles. Thank goodness. And Orioles fans, oh my God, we get to go play the Twins. Thank goodness. So I'm saying the Nats are like, ooh, a little bit easier. Thank goodness. No, the Nats are probably excited that they get to come play the Orioles because the Orioles are very bad at baseball. That's all I got. This was a depressing episode, and I don't want to keep talking. You all have a good night. I'll talk to you soon.